Thanks. You can go ahead, Bruce.
Okay, thanks. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the seminar this morning. And thanks for giving up your time to come and listen to Enya Munting's talk. Just a quick little bit of history about Enya. I know she comes from Namibia and currently resides in Cape Town. But I first met Enya at a symposium, a marine science symposium in Durban, where this very enthusiastic young student came up to me and said, I need to find out a little bit more about how I can make a degree in marine science meaningful. And I'm interested in both the marine biology aspect as well as the fishermen. And yeah, today we're going to be listening to some of the results of Enya's research that she's done for her master's science. Sorry, I didn't introduce myself at the beginning. My name is Bruce Mann, and I'm a retired senior scientist, and I worked at the Oceanographic Research Institute for about 30 years. Currently living in the Eastern Cape, and I'm an associate professor with Department of Ichthyology and Fisheries Science at Rhodes University. But this is not about me. This is about Enya this morning. So yeah, Enya, all yours, and looking forward to your talk. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Bruce. Let me just get my screen sharing going. Oh. Okay, cool. So can everyone see that?
All good.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So thank you so much for coming to my talk about my master's project, which focuses on understanding the impacts of marine protected areas on the commercial line fishing sector in KwaZulu-Natal as a first step towards sustainable MPA governance. I'm a master's student at the Environmental Science Department of Rhodes University, and I'm supervised by Dr. Ant Bernard from SAIAB, Dr. Jess Coburn from the Environmental Science Department at Rhodes, and also Dr. Bruce Mann, who just introduced me so kindly. So to briefly cover the contents of this talk, I wanted to first talk about how this project came about, because it's kind of a monster and I'm not sure how else to start except at the beginning. I'm then going to go through some theory about social-ecological systems as complex adaptive systems, commercial line fishers and why they're the experts in their field, the marine protected areas in KwaZulu-Natal, and then finally I'll briefly cover my methods before starting to discuss my ecological and social findings, and then we'll jump straight back into a little bit more theory before I come to my final recommendations for improving the sustainability of MPAs. So how did this project happen? Well, young me got my degree and I really loved the sea and I wanted to do something meaningful, as Bruce has already said. So I saw this ad and decided to apply because I saw that it was part of a larger project called the Smart Zone project. And this feeds into an even larger project called the Tugela Banks Marine Protected Area Ecosystem-Based Adaptation Project. I thought a little bit of marine science would be a good challenge. And then when my application was accepted, due to a little bit of knowledge that I'd received in my degree in conservation ecology, I decided to ask if I could challenge myself even further by adding a social component. So what was this knowledge that I had that made the social side so important for me? I'd been introduced to social-ecological systems, which is basically a formal term for the fact that human and natural systems are inextricably linked to each other. This is the Social-Ecological Systems framework, which was developed by Elinor Ostrom in 2009 and updated by McGuinness and Ostrom in 2014. And it is described by Ostrom as a common classificatory framework that can facilitate multidisciplinary efforts towards a better understanding of complex social ecological systems. For this talk, I'm going to need my acronyms. So if I use one, please just see the bottom of the slide if you've forgotten what it means what it means. Okay, and then some newer publication by Preiser et al. In 2018 described how social ecological systems are actually a very specific type of system called complex adaptive systems. And these have certain properties that can be found throughout conservation. So the first property of complex adaptive systems is that relationships are super important. These systems are defined more by their relationships than by their constituent components. These systems also adapt in response to feedbacks from interactions between elements and their environment. This is shown in the SES framework by the dotted line surrounding these smaller subsystems, the governance systems that act as resource units and resource systems. Complex adaptive systems also have dynamic processes, which means that they have non-linear responses to change, which basically means that change is quite unpredictable. And this has been one of the big reasons why conservation has been such a complicated thing. These systems are also radically open, so energy, information, and matter are exchanged between CAS and their environment to the extent that setting boundaries for the system is an almost impossible task. Hence the dotted line around the green box, which bounds the social-ecological system under study in the SES framework. The internal structure of CAS also emerges from dynamic interactions within the system as much as those that are outside. Again, hence this all-important green dotted line surrounding the system and the direct links to related ecosystems and social, economic, and political settings. Finally, cause and effect interactions are not unidirectional or linear, and the outputs for one subsystem can also be the inputs for another. This is described in all these pictures, in all these arrows that you see in the system framework. So this means that we cannot understand these types of systems nor predict their behavior based off that of the constituent parts. So what did I then decide to do about the social side of my research? Well, I'd found some publication by Fisheries et al. That described how expert knowledge responds almost perfectly to a lot of the complexity posed by social ecological systems. Experts have extensive experience from which their knowledge is drawn through many years of observation and reflection. This is enhanced when they're embedded in a system where they receive regular and direct feedback on their actions, such as is the case for fishermen. Experts also aggregate knowledge in novel ways and are more likely to recognize the emergent properties of a system. They can draw on this competency in ways that enhance their ability to make more accurate predictions without being able to explain how they do it. One study found that expert predictions are only slightly less accurate than complex computer modeling, and experts need minutes to make these predictions as opposed to days required for modeling. Experts also have an improved ability to adapt to new knowledge and make good decisions given a high level of uncertainty. This means that they have adaptive expertise. Their knowledge is complex and cannot be reduced to facts and suppositions. It's more than memory and intelligence, and tacit or intuitive knowledge is highly significant in experts. Finally, expert knowledge is often highly localized in time and space. You might understand how these properties link to the SES as described previously. So what makes the commercial line fishers experts in their field? Well, they spend more time on the water interacting with linefish species than any other fishers. They have the highest catch per unit effort of all line fishers, which means that they really know their species, they know where to look for them, and they understand how they respond to the weather. Furthermore, they regularly engage with marine protected areas because they have strong repercussions for misdeeds and can lose their fishing rights, so they need to know the rules and follow them. Finally, they have long-term rights which last for 7 years, and fishers will often renew their rights multiple times throughout their lifetime, which means that they really are spending significant amounts of time out there understanding what's going on in their environment. So moving on to the environment, this is a map of the marine protected areas of South Africa as of 2019. And as you can see, all of the largest coastal marine protected areas are actually along the coastline of KwaZulu-Natal. This area is also really important for line fishing. By the way, line fishing means fishing with a rod and reel or with a hand line and has nothing to do with long lines or trawling. Interestingly, all of the MPAs in this area have also been declared with the explicit purpose of supporting linefish recovery after the declaration of a state of emergency in linefish in 2000. Even the Pondoland MPA, which is the oldest MPA in the study, and was not updated in 2019. Isimangaliso has an older component, but Pondoland wasn't updated. So even this MPA has the explicit purpose of allowing overexploited species a space in which to recover. So with all of the theory out of the way, my own project aims to provide a baseline description of the social ecological system surrounding the MPA network from a commercial line fishing perspective, and then to use the integrated results to make recommendations to improve the sustainability of MPA governance and management. The methods for this project are a bit complicated. I have a social component, and then I have an ecological component, and I'm currently in the process of integrating this knowledge to come to a social ecological systems perspective, which I then use to make my recommendations. In slightly more detail, my ecological component aims to use baited remote underwater stereo video systems data to determine how the MPA network in KwaZulu-Natal affects the populations of commercially important linefish stocks. So for this, my methods were using BRUVs and video analysis and event measure with statistical analysis of my data using R and RStudio. For the social component, I look at understanding the perceptions of commercial line fishers in KwaZulu-Natal regarding how the MPA network and its governance affects them, as well as what they think could be done to improve this in future. I conducted semi-structured interviews with 22 of 30 active commercial line fishers in the province, and then did quantitative and qualitative analysis of this data. Finally, for the SES perspective, I'm just looking at the results of my previous two components as well as some literature, and I will be hosting workshops later in the year to get to a full systems perspective and then make my recommendations. So to look at the sampling, this is a picture of a stereo-BRUV, just so that you know what apparatus we're using. And this is a map of our study sites. So from north to south, the marine protected areas are Isimangaliso, Utikela Banks, Aliwal Shoal, Protea Banks, and then Pondoland MPA. The Pondoland MPA is actually in the Eastern Cape, but is nevertheless relevant to the fishing sector that I'm looking at, because fishermen rely on the species that come out of there and also are blocked from going into certain areas there. So we used data from MRF, the marine imaging platform at SAIAB, for this project, and the sampling sites are here indicated in the dots along the coastline. We only looked at mesophotic reefs, which meant that not all of these sampling sites were used, and so these points now indicated in purple show the rough location of all the sampling sites I used. The red squares on this map indicate the location of the fishermen who I interviewed. Okay, so moving on to my results. So for the ecological component, we decided to look only at the mature populations of commercially important fish species. This is because these populations are both fishable and they're also breeding populations. So it's a wonderful point of intersecting interests between the MPAs and the fishermen themselves. We also decided to look at both abundance and biomass metrics. So if you look at this image, you'll see that marine protected areas generally work. There are more fish in marine protected areas mostly than in the fished areas. Importantly, Aliwal Shoal and Protea Banks were sampled actually before their declaration in 2017. So these two areas were not actually MPAs yet at the time, which could explain the poor performance of Protea Banks in this case. Isimangaliso and Pondoland, are clearly performing quite well, and this has probably got to do with the fact that they are the oldest and have been in place for the longest. When we look at biomass metrics, a similar pattern can be found, especially with Isimangaliso and Pondoland standing out once again. But we didn't just want to look at a comparison of MPA versus no MPA, we also wanted to understand how zonation affects the fish populations. So here you can see that the restricted zones, which are now indicated in blue squares, rectangles, sorry, are really performing better than any of the other zones. A restricted zone is an area where no fishing is allowed whatsoever, while in a controlled zone, certain rules dictate who may fish and what gear may be used. So you can see that the restricted zones really are performing better in terms of abundance. When we move over to the biomass metrics, I'd like to point out an interesting pattern. So just pay attention to the Isimangaliso MPA restricted zone. As we move into biomass, you can see that these fish are, or basically there's a huge biomass relative to the abundance. So what does this mean? It means that those fish are really, really big. And this is excellent news, ecologically speaking, because it means that they're doing a good job of breeding. Bigger fish are better breeders and fulfill an ecological role much better than smaller fish do. Isimangaliso's controlled zone also performs quite well if you look at these images, and this has got to do with the fact that bottom fishing is not allowed in this controlled zone at all, so it should be performing similarly to a restricted zone for the fish species that we are looking at. If you look at Ponderland, the abundance versus biomass metric kind of looks the same with the higher biomass than abundance. But then interestingly, if we look at the Tugela MPA, you'll see that it has a relatively high abundance of mature fish, but slightly lower biomass. I think that this could have something to do with the fact that it's a much newer MPA, and potentially, although the fish are growing to adult size, they haven't yet reached this really big fish kind of size where they're filling this amazing ecological role. So this just points to the importance of keeping MPAs closed for a long period of time. And then moving on to my social component. So I managed to identify 4 themes in the interviews that I held, which I will discuss with you. I also have put quotes up here, which I'm not going to be reading to you. These just indicate, or they're just something to keep you busy while I talk, so feel free to read them. So the first theme that I identified was that fishers who I spoke to believe that well-managed marine protected areas are effective and necessary for fishery sustainability. 100% of the fishers thought that it was important to manage fish stocks. The majority of them thought that MPAs are a good tool for doing this, and about half of them believe that their community strongly supports MPAs. So the question begs to be asked, why is there this decreasing support? What's going on here? And for this, theme 2 explains, fishers often said that fisheries and MPA monitoring and enforcement is poor and must be improved. Actually, this was all the fishers had this thought and shared it with me. So you can see here that most fishers did not believe that MPA rule enforcement was done fairly. They also often spoke about illegal fishing going unchecked, both inside and outside MPAs. And illegal fishing has a severe impact not only on fish populations, but also throughout the fisheries value chain. Illegal fishing translates to illegal fish sales, which decreases the fishing price because poachers don't have the same input costs and running costs that the legal fishers do. Theme 3 was that a lack of relationship between fisheries management, MPA management, and commercial line fishers hinders the effectiveness of MPAs all round. Before the declaration of new MPAs in 2019, there were consultation processes in place, and unfortunately, none of the fishers believed that these consultations were meaningful, instead believing that they'd been given an opportunity to comment but never really had their voice heard. They often also spoke about a lack of communication, which severely erodes trust between them and the department and management. Furthermore, they spoke about a lack of response to tip-offs, which sours the relationships, especially as commercials are quite highly regulated and feel singled out when they see recreational fishers poaching and nothing really happening to them when they have such strong enforcement on their own side. Finally, theme 4 was that a lack of diverse sources of information leads to a misguided decision-making and long-term unsustainability in MPA and fisheries management. It was mentioned that research is looking at old targets, and this is well evidenced in my own project where I used literature to decide which species to look at for this project initially, but when I spoke to fishermen, they added 18 new target species to my list. Fishers would love to be given a platform on which they can engage meaningfully with management and share their knowledge, but they also want more diverse information from all sources to be considered for management decisions in general. For example, in enforcement, they suggested looking critically at fisher behavior and checking shops regularly to enforce rules around fish sales, as well as mandatory vessel monitoring systems for all fishers who are on the ocean on a boat. So that's that for my results. And now I'd like to jump back into a little bit more theory before we get to my final recommendations, which are quite short and sweet. So interdisciplinary sustainability research and practice is on the rise, and with it comes a host of philosophical issues around the nature of reality and what constitutes knowledge. These are known as ontologies and epistemologies. Primarily, the issue lies in finding ways to regard the SES as one whole system without encouraging harmful dichotomies in the way we understand the world. For example, the human versus nature split that is so common. Fortunately, a process-relational perspective comes to the rescue. Garcia et al. Explain that process-relational perspectives focus attention on processes as opposed to objects as the primary constituents of reality. Processes can be understood as patterns, and their properties and functions are defined by the set of relations that constitute them. These relations span over different realms, such as the social and ecological, which is why a process-relational perspective is particularly useful for social-ecological systems research. West et al. Explain that from a relational perspective, the objects that we generally perceive as their own entities, for example, fish and people, are reconceived as temporary convergences within flows of relationships that already encompass what we tend to think of as human and natural aspects. This means that there is no separation between epistemology, the theory of knowledge, and ontology, what is real. No separation between these two means that processes and relations do not exist outside of the observer, but interestingly, the process-relational perspective does not require there to be a difference between the observer and the observed. Hence, existence is real and permanent, and every being is both the observed and the observer. Here I would like to share a very old quote. Heraclitus in 500 BC is quoted as saying that everything changes but change itself. Everything flows and nothing remains the same. You cannot step twice into the same river for other waters and yet others go flowing ever on. This is a philosopher who influenced slightly more modern philosophers like Plato and Aristotle. To me, it seems like we have come full circle to a very old and ancient way of understanding life. How all of this translates to finding more sustainable pathways to MPA governance and management. Well, firstly, I'd like to show you this beautiful picture by Leonardo da Vinci of the flower of life. This is a sacred geometry, which is often interpreted as speaking to the connectedness of all things. However, we can't just look at the flower of life. We also need some new thoughts on this. And for this, I defer to Malhotra's publication on information ecology and knowledge management for hyperturbulent organizational environments, such as I believe the MPA environment is. So Malhotra posits that behavioral control is better practiced through encouraging personal commitment to a set of beliefs, norms, and values than through compliance. He describes compliance as rule-abiding behavior, which results either from a desire to receive some reward or to avoid punishment. Personal commitment, on the other hand, is defined as the internalization of management-derived sanctions and beliefs, norms, and values, in the sense that they become part of the core of the individual's perceptual world. So how does one bring this type of behavioral control into a system? Well, he says that a loose, tight knowledge management system is the way to go. These systems are loose because they allow for underlying assumptions and best practices to be regularly and collectively revisited. This enables the creation of shared mental models of beliefs, norms, and values that govern the entire management system. These systems are tight in that they have efficient flows of information. The reevaluation of assumptions and best practices can be conducted regularly in the most efficient way possible and captures the diversity of mental models that exists within the organization, or in this case, the social-ecological system. So moving into more practical terms, how does all of this translate to creating more sustainable MPAs? Well, I found a wonderful publication by Nkata and McCool, the diagram for which I have adapted slightly here to encompass some of the findings from my own project. They posit that for effective protective areas, governance and management subsystems must be linked through effective and efficient planning processes. So we do need to first define the difference between governance and management. In South African contexts, Koopman et al. Define governance as the interaction of policies, institutions, and processes that determine who participates in decisions, how decisions are made, and who is responsible for implementation. This includes institutional and legislative frameworks within which management is performed. Nkata and McCool, however, elaborate that governance processes should be designed to allow for dialogue and negotiations around the societal beliefs and values involving multiple stakeholders. They are considered, or governance is considered to be a higher level social system that enables society to deliberate, define, and accept or reject alternative societal goals surrounding protected areas and what should be done regarding them. Management, on the other hand, is defined by both basically as the implementation of the decisions that are made on governance level and comes with its own set of complexity. So how do we actually do this in the South African context? Well, it's kind of simple, but kind of very complicated. We need to commit to existing policy on co-management. The white paper on sustainable coastal development in South Africa, which was published 24 years ago in 2000, highlighted co-management as a priority. In practice, this is going to require work both from the fishers side and from the departmental and management side, and could look like this. So commercial line fishers would have to first become organized as a sector and elect trusted representatives who could speak on their behalf. These representatives would then work to become recognized as key stakeholders in MPA management forums, which have been set up as part of the management plan for each MPA in KwaZulu-Natal. From the departmental and management side, firstly, improving communication with fishers would be a wonderful first step, and I think it would be a powerful way to start fixing the relationships that are clearly eroded at the moment. This would have to be done such that everyone has the same information available to them. So fishers need to understand why decisions are being made the way that they're made on the departmental and governance side, and the governance needs to understand what's happening on the ground and what the fishers are thinking about or coming up against in terms of problems. Next, they would have to legitimize fisher perceptions as valuable expert knowledge, and then engage with regular planning and engagement with the commercial line fishers specifically, since, as I have explained, they really are the experts in their field. This would mean that managers and governance would have to accept advice provided by commercial line fishers and be willing to find practical solutions for management problems that are posed to them. Finally, they would have to create space for commercial line fishers to engage with and participate in management. This is quite a long-term goal, but I think that working from step 1 to step 4, we could get there eventually. In order to create this space, it may involve establishing partnerships that enable self-policing for the commercial fishers, and as well as quick and decisive responses to tip-offs about illegal fishing, with adequate punishment for those who dare to break the law. And that is all that I have to say about that. Thank you very much for coming to this talk. And thank you in particular to the NRF for funding my entire studies, and for SAIAB for the institution that they have welcomed me into, and for the wonderful supervision that I've received from all 3 of my supervisors. Finally, I'd like to thank Prof. Mandy Lombard for her SAACHI funding, which has gone a long way, or is the only reason actually that I have money for my social component at all. Thank you very much, and please don't be shy to reach out if you have any thoughts or questions on the email address below.
Yeah.
I think we'll take questions.
Thanks very much, Enya. And yeah, well done. A fascinating presentation. Yeah, we are open to questions. If anybody has any specific questions to ask Enya, please unmute yourself and fire away. I see that there haven't been any questions in the chat that I can see as yet, or in this Q&A. Any questions?
Okay. Francesca, I see you've raised your hand. I'll just sneak in here with a quick question. Well done, Enya. On your last slide, you had 2 sets of groups that need to maybe change a little bit in order for co-management to work. The fishers and DEFI and the management agencies. If you look at those 2, from my perspective, the easy one is the one on the left. The more difficult one is the one on the right. What can the people on the right, DEFI and the managers, do? What do they really need to do, and who needs to do it? Because it's all very well, the fishermen could get themselves organized and they could form an association. I think that that's not an impossible task. But I think that the challenges will come on the other side. How do you propose overcoming those challenges?
It's a very good question, and yeah, I'm still busy with the integration and social-ecological systems whole picture part of my thesis, so I haven't really gotten to much more detail about this. But the reason why I had the first point of order there as being an improvement in communication is because I think that this could really go a long way just to starting the ball rolling. And I think given that we already have a policy environment that's encouraging for co-management, it means that there's at least some political will for this. But I haven't honestly really gotten to the point where I've got super practical thoughts on that side of things. I think mainly it would just be a thing of improving your communication and creating spaces for experts such as the commercial line fishers to be heard, potentially above the general populace, so where fishers with expertise in the area are able to provide commentary. I think we should be asking them for their thoughts on MPAs potentially before we ask the general populace. But that's just a small beginning.
I think it's inspiring DEFI and the managers to really start to take it seriously, that co-management. So I think that that's a big part of it. And maybe the South African Marine Linefish Association needs to be resurrected, because that was a forum for communication. So to build in those existing forums. I see, Francesca, you put up your hand, and then William's got his hand up.
Yes, thank you, Enya. Very interesting and complex as soon as you put the social component, and so necessary. In your last slide, you show like from management to government. It's like a kind of vertical structure, and you focused on the commercial fisheries, but from some of the social points that you were showing in the previous slides, there seems to be quite a little bit of not understanding or not communication between commercial fishers and recreational fishers. And perhaps, I don't know if the voice of the subsistence fishers is also being heard. Perhaps that type of dialogues also need to be increased. Are they talking to one another? That seems, from some of the comments, it seems like the commercial fishers were accusing some other fishers to take a lot, and there was no control over boats or stuff like that. So I'm not sure if you have a comment regarding to communicating across the fishers as well, all categories. Thank you.
Yeah, so I definitely found that there seems to be a lot of tension between the commercial and recreational fisheries. And I don't think it's unwarranted. I think from what the commercials said to me, obviously I haven't listened to both sides of the story, so I can't really make any overarching claims, but it does seem like the commercials have a lot more enforcement happening on them, and they would like the same enforcement to be applied to recreational and other fisheries. But that said, there's definitely evidence of tension between these groups, and I think that if they could collaborate better, it would definitely be better for the MPAs as well. One fisher actually told me that they're trying to work, they were a bit concerned about the populations of a certain species of fish, and they mentioned that they were going to try to work with the clubs to bring an informal ban on catching that fish for recreational and commercial fishers about. So it seems like there is some sort of relationship, but it's got a lot of tensions in it. So I definitely think improving that relationship and standing together as one group would be desirable.
Yeah, perhaps I can just add to that response, Enya, is that this sort of conflict between users is not unusual. You find it throughout the world in fisheries, where you have different sectors competing for the same resource. And I think that, at the end of the day, if there's a problem at sea, one of the boats has a motor down and calls out a pan or a mayday, whichever boats are nearest on the water are going to go to assist that person. So there's an underlying brothership on the water, as we said, and ultimately the two sectors can talk to each other. And I think one of the best places for this to be done in specific cases with MPAs is in those MPA forums that you spoke about, where both commercial fishermen and recreational ski boat fishermen should be represented, because at that level, it's individuals talking, and a lot of the kind of conflicts and the sort of misunderstandings between each other can be ironed out and understood at that level. So I think it's achievable, but it just means people coming together and confronting problems and sorting them out. But yeah. Next person to have a question was William.
Good morning, colleagues. I don't know if I'm audible.
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah.
Yes, no, Enya, it's a nice presentation. Immediately when I saw you presenting it, and with the inclusion of livelihoods or social component to these MPAs, I wanted to really make sure that I attend to this. William is a production scientist from the DFFE, so probably one of the people there that are to blame in this it's us. But DFFE has components, has fisheries, and part of that fisheries is also another directorate called aquaculture. And everybody who's talking MPA at around here, Grahamstown, because SAIAB does a lot of this, and Rose University in particular too. I keep on asking, how can aquaculture help the situation? Because our mandate as aquaculture scientists is to ensure that people, the livelihoods are improved, and food security is key. That's what I liked about the previous question that asked about subsistence farmers. Those are different category of people altogether now, because commercial, recreational are doing this for other reasons than subsistence, of which now with the poverty levels that the national government is trying to solve, the livelihood of the people are getting worse and worse. So I would like to know also if in your social questions, if you also asked about the income of these social groups that we're doing. So how can we see what encourages the activities around those MPAs? I am of the belief that if aquaculture can be coupled into these MPAs, probably we can start seeing MPAs having a deadline to say, okay, now let's put MPA for this purpose. Immediately then it recovers, then people can start utilizing these resources that are around them, because I care about livelihoods more than the guys who are swimming in there. As much as we are we are from the environment of which we want to protect, to do it with sustainably so, but people are suffering. The areas we're mentioning, as we are busy presenting the MPAs, I'm looking at the people around them and the villages around them. So people are suffering there and the resources are around them. That's why there's this negative now attitude towards the MPAs. It's because of the people's livelihoods that are changing. And that's basically what I wanted my input to be today. If it's possible, I would like to invite you to my office and probably we see how we can also talk to your supervisors around further collaborations in this kind of issues. That will be nice. I'm based here at Rhodes at Dips. Thanks. Bye.
Well, thank you so much, William, for coming to my talk and for listening to everything I had to say. I really appreciate that. And it's nice to know that the DFFE is interested in understanding how we can do better. So I think it was quite a large question, but the core of it, as far as I understand, is whether or not aquaculture inside the MPAs would actually be helpful. Am I understanding that correctly? Maybe. So for me, I think the fisheries problem is very complicated. There's lots of people that are engaged in the system, and my project, just to clarify, really focused on interviewing the commercial line fishing rights holders only. So I only spoke to those who have commercial line fishing rights to their names. This was because I needed to be able to get through this project in the time frame that I have. So the fishers who I spoke to generally are not, they're not the subsistence guys, and they're not really the ones who are struggling. And they recognize that the economic situation at the moment is part of what's causing this huge boom in poaching in KZN. A lot of fishers did say that people need to eat, and the reason why there is so much poaching is just because there's not really alternative options in our current economy. So there is recognition for that among the fishers. And then I think the problem that they spoke about is mostly that the recreationally licensed fishers are poaching and selling the fish. It's not that they didn't really mention the subsistence fisheries too much as a problem, but I think that maybe comes with a lot of complexity in its own. On the side of aquaculture, honestly, my background is in conservation ecology, and it came from Stellenbosch University. So my undergrad was very much about land-based conservation. So I don't find myself on solid ground when I speak too much about fisheries and the ecological side of things. But from what I've read about aquaculture, there are whole systems ways to conduct aquaculture. But as far as I understand, there are also quite a few ecological risks still associated with aquaculture. And I just off the top of my head, would probably think it's better to keep MPAs separate from aquaculture projects. Also, the age of the MPAs was quite clearly a very important contributing factor to their success in my project. And this is because, for example, a mussel cracker takes a very, very, very long time to reach mature age, and even longer to reach that really big fish size where it's spawning a lot and creating a lot of new life that can move into the rest of the ocean. So I think MPAs should stay in place. This is my understanding from the literature and from my own project, but I think there's ways to negotiate all this complexity. And yeah, I really appreciate that you're willing to engage with me on that. So I'd be more than happy to set up a meeting. I'll be in Grahamstown at some point. So yeah, please feel free to email me, or I'll find your address and email you. And thanks for carrying.
Yeah, if I can also just add a little bit, I think pretty much you've handled it, Enya, but from the experience of South Africa in the aquaculture realm, marine aquaculture in particular, it has not been successful. Our coastline is very exposed. We've got one of the most powerful boundary currents in the world, the Agulhas Current. And so we do not have habitats and places to do the kind of aquaculture that we see, for example, in Canada and in Norway, in the fjords, the protected waters. The pump ashore systems where we pumping water from the sea onto tanks has really only worked in the abalone aquaculture setup because of the high value of the product that's being produced. In terms of addressing societal needs and food for poor people, aquaculture, to my mind, is not the immediate solution that jumps to mind. And certainly, as Enya has said, the reason for our MPAs is to protect our marine biodiversity and to rebuild some of the overexploited fish stocks, and to act as a reservoir for those fish to spill over into the adjacent areas. So we shouldn't be looking at them as an opportunity to develop alternative sources of food. But that's my perspective, and I'm certainly also available to chat to you more about that, William. The next person who had their hand up was
jump
Andy.
in there one.
Yeah.
Sorry, I just wanted to jump in on one last thing. Yeah, you just reminded me about a paper that I'd read when I was doing my ecological side of things, that found that one really big fish, female fish, will spawn about 300 to 600 times more eggs than a small fish. So this is why the fact that we have really big fish in Isimangaliso is really a huge win for fisheries. And I think if we can maintain that kind of focus on getting to the point where our fish stocks are that healthy that they're creating 600 times more eggs that can be exported out, I think that's really wonderful. So,
it's called the Boff hypothesis, the big old fat fecund female fish.
Yes.
Mandy, your question.
Thanks, Bruce. Yeah, thanks, Enya. Just in a quick response to Bruce, I heard earlier that you mentioned there's a brotherhood at sea. And now you're talking about big old fat female fish. So I think we also have a sisterhood at sea. Just saying.
Yes.
Okay.
Enya,
so you are currently hitting the real world in a complex systems analysis. So you trained as a biologist, and now you've had to come to terms with epistemologies and ontologies and philosophers, and it's incredibly difficult, especially just within a master's, to try and make sense of this complexity. And so I came in late, for which I apologize. So I missed the objectives of your study. But what I'd like to do is just offer a possible way for you to grapple in a quantitative way with the complexity that you're dealing with. So what we've started doing is using system dynamic models into which you can put both quantitative and qualitative data. And they are built on very simple causal loop diagrams. And you've already started building a couple of those in the slides that you showed us. So you're building these links between governance and management and all of the stuff. Of course, this is, you know, something that could take the rest of your life, but in the context of a master's, and maybe just as a wrap-up chapter, and I don't know how far you are with handing in, a causal loop diagram based on whatever your objectives are could help you identify those triggers, those levers that are going to give you the biggest return on your investment. So if your objective is to save fish in a particular place, then you can go in and say, okay, these are all the things that are impacting, these are all the things that are adding to, these are the things that are detracting from, these are the players that are involved. And it allows us as science thinkers to draw a diagram that links stuff that always comes back in a circle. So like the circular economies we're trying to reach. And it brings that social-ecological systems stuff into a tangible perspective that people like you and me can actually understand. Because once you start fiddling with all the social stuff and the policy analyses, my brain goes on holiday. It's like, I can't deal with that level of stuff. But somehow you need to. And so I've found that by finding a software tool that is free, that I can use, and I can put things in boxes and I can link lines between them, I can build equations that somehow give me basically the results that I'm finding. I find that extremely useful. So I know there's quite a lot of expertise at Rhodes in system dynamics modeling, and you don't have to go that far. You can just start with your causal loop diagrams, and you can say, you know, my recommendation is based on the fact that in my causal loop diagram, the biggest lever that I can pull to help fish survive is this one. And it might be a policy lever like William was talking about. And by the way, that was a wonderful invitation, which you definitely need to take him up on. It could be a policy lever. It could be getting that linefish working group that Judy was talking about. But you know, it could be one of those things, could be really outbatting all of the other things that you could do, or maybe they're all equally important. I don't know. But these causal loop diagrams allow you to start to grapple with all the components of your system and which ones really require attention if you want to reach a particular objective. So I just wanted to put that in. And if you want to see the work we've done in Algoa Bay, Esti Vermeulen has published her PhD, and it's got those in it, and also our work with WIOMSA for the Western Indian Ocean Regional Marine Spatial Plan. We've also got a lot of those causal loop diagrams in there, helping us trying to figure out how to save, you know, fish in the Western Indian Ocean, which is quite a big task. Okay, so that was just my comment. Thank you, Breeze. It's not a question, Enya, it was just a comment. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Mandy. That's amazing advice. That's really going to help me with my last chapter, which I'm still writing. So I really appreciate that.
Great. I see Sean Fennessy from Ori has his hand up.
Yeah, how's it, everyone? Sorry I missed the talk entirely, so I only came in at the question time. But just a little bit of background to some of the poaching comments that are made. Some years ago, we did some linefish survey work up in the Richards Bay area. And we did a demand survey on consumers, and we went and interviewed people at one of the largest supermarkets or shopping malls in Richards Bay. And we certainly established that the demand for lionfish amongst people is very high, and it far outstrips what the commercials are able to supply, certainly in Richards Bay, and it probably applies more widely in KZN as well. And the irony is that most of the commercial fish, probably 90% of it, is not available in KZN. It's sent up to the VAL. So you've got this conflict between the demand and the lack of supply, which certainly drives a lot of the poaching for lionfish. So yeah, that's just a bit of context for you.
That's quite interesting, because when I was speaking to the fishers, they told me that they couldn't get their price in KwaZulu-Natal, and that's why they were forced to export to Joburg. So yeah, we've got quite an interesting catch-22 going on there in that case. Thank you so much for that. I'll definitely look for the research.
Thanks, Sean. Yeah, I see you've been working on your talk for the South African Marine Linefish Symposium, which is going to be held in August. And I see that's what you've prepared as an abstract for your talk. So yeah, Enya's going to be presenting at that symposium too. So this is just a little plug for anyone interested. That's going to be held in the Eastern Cape at eMpikweni in mid-August, if you're interested. Any more questions from the audience? I don't see any more hands up. And I don't see anything on the chat or the Q&A. So yeah.
One question. Sorry,
Judy,
last question.
Judy has to have the last question.
No, just so we've got a project running at the V&A waterfront where we're trying to see what we can do to ensure that as many restaurants as possible at the V&A only sell sustainable seafood. And one of the things that we're exploring is shortening the loop between supplier and end user. What is the potential for the commercial fishers of KZN to look at that as a place to sell their fish? If we can get the right quantity and the right demand, and if the fishers can supply what the restaurants need at the right time and the right quantity and the right quality, is there a way we can start to shorten these supply chains so that we go directly from the fisherman to the user in as short a way as possible? Is there any way we can explore that a little bit more?
I definitely think, yeah, I've done a little bit of previous work on food systems, and I think the way to go is definitely to shorten the loop. And I think South Africa seems in general to be moving in that direction. However, I don't know if I have the authority to really be able to answer that question properly. I think that given the fact that they're already exporting to Joburg, I'm sure that they might have communication channels and supply channels that they could leverage to get to the V&A. But I think it seems like every fisherman, they also don't really have like any cooperative sort of arrangement going on, so, and I know that cooperatives are generally a very good way to directly link supply and demand. So potentially it would have to be in the hands of the fishers, but if they could cooperativize or something like that, then they might be able to do a bit more of that, or it would have to be a fisher by fisher kind of arrangement. So each fisher would have to be approached individually and asked what their thoughts are on the matter and yeah, how to proceed.
Thanks, Enya. Well done. Nice presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks very much, Enya. And yeah, there are no more questions. So Lucky, I'll hand over to you to let us know about the next seminars that you have planned. But thanks very much, everyone. Cheers.
Yeah, thanks a million for coming and listening. I appreciate it.